Hello and welcome to the Red Dice Diaries, and we have a special guest with us. She's Rob Davis, the Swamper from the YouTube RPG Brigade. I'll put a link to his channel in the description down below so you can check that out. And Rob was kind enough to respond to a video response that I put to one of Same Old G's videos about the problems of being a GM when you go to play a game and the urge to constantly analyse a game, and it sort of takes you out of the game and means you don't tend to enjoy it quite as much. You're never really sort of immersed in it as fully as you might otherwise be, because you're always sort of thinking at it from a GM stance and trying to sort of deconstruct it in your own mind and think about how you might have done it. And Rob was kind enough to agree to this hangout because he believes that he may have some advice or a solution that may prove useful. So, Rob, take it away.
Okay, so I'm going to start this off newspaper sensationalist style and make two controversial statements, which I will later back up, slightly tongue-in-cheek. Two things. First of all, the problem is you, and second of all, it's because you're being lazy. Now, having said that, don't hate me. I'm going to explain them. The problem is you. You are focusing your perception. Fine, but you're putting your efforts forward at the wrong time. There is nothing wrong with doing the kind of analysis that you spoke of in your video. Don't do it during gameplay. Do it after the session. Think about that. Make notes to the GM. Heck, the next day have a discussion with the GM. I really liked when you did this. I didn't care when you did this, so on and so forth. That analysis is fine. Everybody does it. Now, I also I should clarify that this advice is for experienced players, and I don't mean that in an elitist style, but rather, if you're still learning how to role play, if you're still getting the feel for mechanics of the system, don't think about any of this. Just focus on that. But once you've got that down, and you've been a GM, you get, like you say, this GM mindset. You're analyzing, and you're analyzing. To the point where it's taking you out of the play. It's taking you out of the moment. You need to focus your efforts elsewhere. So, as a player, you're role-playing, you're thinking in character, you're acting in character. Remember that you're thinking in character a lot, too. That helps with your responses. But when the GM does something and you start analyzing it, don't be mentally critiquing it. Instead, think about, what is the GM trying to accomplish in this scene, and how can I, through the character and the personality I've created for him, help him make that happen? I'm a GM. I can assist, but I can assist as a player. So if the GM is trying to make an action scene and get all the players riled up, have your character respond in kind. Have your character respond in that manner, and speak in a manner to the other players to help him get that emotion across to them. Your GM will love you for it and bring the scene more lively.
I think one of the issues I have myself is, and I agree entirely with what you've just said about a GM who's a player in another game. You can sort of pick up on these hooks and you can help the game along, and that's a great thing to do, since obviously it improves the game for not just yourself, helps the GM out, but also for the other players. But I mean, one of the things I've found is, as a GM, where there's certain sort of cues and certain sort of setups in a game that you recognise herald a certain event that's about to happen. And so let's say I use a certain format in the lead up to a combat encounter, and then I'm sitting as a player in another game, and I see that same sort of lead-in being used. Now, obviously, I'm not going to let it influence me playing the character, because obviously I don't, without getting into a huge argument about metagaming, my character doesn't know that a big combat encounter is about to break out. However, there's always that bit in the back of your mind that sort of goes, oh, right, well, I think we're going to get ready for a combat encounter. And in a way, it just sort of takes the shine off the sort of surprise of that sort of moment and the unexpectedness of it.
Yes, you're right. And I mean, I don't know how avoidable that is entirely. I mean, I'm often watching movies and I go, oh, this is about to occur. I'm reading a book. This is about to occur. Because logic follows logic generally, right? You know, yep. So, take a horror movie. a person's walking through a room, opening doors all alone, and then the music starts building up, you know something's about to happen. You're sitting there waiting for it to happen, right? So that part isn't really avoidable, that expectation. But if the part of it that bothers you, if it bothers you, put that away for later. And maybe you want to have a discussion with the GM later saying, your cues are very obvious, they're very blunt, you need to kind of settle them up. Or, you know, consider not playing with that GM or whatever you want to do. But you're you're already in the game, go with it. He's trying to set up a combat encounter. How can I, in a non-obviously metagaming way, help him make this impending combat, bring it to life, be more exciting, be more whatever. Don't fall into the tired cliche of you draw your weapon when your DM has given you no clues that you should draw your weapon. But, you know, maybe you speak to your fellow players and tell them, be on your toes, we're getting into enemy territory, or words to that effect. Right? So once again, you're assisting the GM in what he's trying to accomplish. Even if the GM's efforts seem clumsy to you, you're already on the ride, might as well enjoy the ride.
Very true, very true.
Okay, so we've talked about the GM mind with regards to the GM. Now let's look at getting out of the GM mind with regards to players. So point of doing this mentally isn't just to be a nice guy and assist the GM. It's to get your mind busy and focused on that and not on picking apart the game. You'll have time to do that later. So it's okay that analysis is okay. It's not wrong. It's almost instinctual. You can't help it. But you can put it aside and just, you know, focus on the moment. So that is the point of this. You're pushing that mental work aside and you're substituting other mental work. And if you're not substituting other mental work, then you're being lazy. That's the laziness part I was referring to, right? Where you just sit there and go, oh, I don't like that. I don't. Do something about it. You know what I mean? You're not helpless. So we were talking just before you started filming there about how a good GM can have awareness and notice that one particular player, perhaps it's an introverted person, has been really quiet and they haven't said anything or really participated for half an hour or 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Be aware of that as a player. Have that player awareness or that extension of GM awareness to realize that as a player and think, how can my character help bring that character into the game or that player into the game through our characters? Think of something about that character and what you know about your character that can draw them together, even if it's antagonistic, as long as you engage the player. Now all of a sudden that player is brought into the game. They're playing, you've helped that player to play the game, and they're going to have more fun because of it.
Well,
so once again, you're helping everything.
It's been sort of discussed in, and I guess brought up in a few videos, the idea of sort of conflict within a party, and obviously conflict can be very sort of destructive to an adventuring party, a group, if it's not sort of handled correctly. But as you say, even if you've got a bit of an antagonistic relationship with a character, between the two characters, you can still, if you sort of handle it right, you can still sort of bring them into your plot or plot that's going on via that sort of relationship you have with them. And it doesn't have to be something that's destructive. If it's handled correctly, it can be a great source of roleplay. Maybe you've got like a sort of a friendly rivalry with another character, or the stereotypical sort of you're trying to one-up each other and you're trying to sort of outdo each other. Then it can be a great source of plot. And as you say, it can really sort of help move the game along. Maybe if there's a bit of a quieter moment or there's a bit of a lull, that sort of rivalry can really sort of get a game going again.
Quite right. And you know, there's many examples of this in fiction. Legolas and Gimli, right? They're often, even though they would do anything, you know, die for the other person, they still had that rivalry. Spock and McCoy from Star Trek, right? They were frequently butting heads and disagreeing, and yet not in a way that brought the game to a halt, brought the adventure to a halt. It allowed it to keep going. And ultimately it makes the characters deeper and more believable, and that increases immersion and increases the joy for everyone. One of the mantras I say often as a gamer, and I can't really say this often enough, is Too often I see people playing a game in a lazy fashion. And what I mean is, it's not enough that you role-play your character and act and respond in character. That is not enough. Work harder. You have a job, a duty, an obligation when you come to every session to try. It is your job to entertain everyone else at the table. And everybody at the table has that same job. And if you're not doing that, if you're just sitting there being lazy, you are slacking off and putting more strain on other people. And I don't want it to seem like it's work, but you have to make an effort at it constantly. The entire session, you should be making that effort. If you're out of a scene, feel free to enjoy a scene, but when anytime there's that kind of lull, think of a way that you can help bring the scene to life. I know for myself, when I'm playing a game, almost every time a GM is talking for more than 10 seconds, I can't wait to get in there. I'm thinking of something my character can do, some way my character can propel the story forward. I want that from every player. I want every player dying for me to shut up so their character can do something and be part of the game, right? That kind of proactive really, really brings a game to life. And it kind of relates to what we're talking about here too with the GM mind. If you're really focused on that, you don't have time to do all the analysis now. You're trying your best to bring the scene to life like a professional actor on the stage. You want to give your best, I want to say performance because it's more than just acting, but you want to try and make the game as good as it can be.
Yeah, I think as you were rightly saying, that whole thing about sort of bouncing stuff off other players, as we were talking about before we started recording, this idea of the more sort of input you have sort of collectively as a group, the more you're actually going to get out of it, the more the other players and the GM will get out of it, because it's not just, as you say, one person or two people picking up the slack and putting their ideas in. It's more people sort of collaborating to make a more interesting experience. Because as I was saying to you before we started, if you just put in your own viewpoint, that's all you're going to get out of it.
Yes. Too often parties devolve down where they have a captain or a spokesman who does most of the talking and makes most of the decisions for the players. And I've talked to other players about this, and they say, well, I'm fine with letting him make the choices. Well, I'll tell you what, as someone else sitting at the table, I'm not fine with it if he's making all good choices. I want everybody participating. That's more interesting. It's more entertaining. Yeah. Don't be lazy. Do your part. Make your effort every session, the whole session. Right? It's like you're a sports team. You're trying to win. And the winning isn't beating the quests, saving the princess, getting the treasure. The winning is making the adventure of playing, the exercise of playing the game itself as good as it can possibly be.
Well, I mean, it's like that, although it's a bit of a sort of tired old cliche now, it's like that old sort of saying where it's not so much the destination, it's the journey you take to actually get to that destination that's the sort of right. I mean, often you'll hear it in sort of like movies or books where it's more about the journey than the sort of like the end of the journey. I suppose the same could be said for RPGs.
Right. So we can look at pacing. Sometimes you can help a GM out even when he doesn't know he needs help. We talked a little bit about this before as well, where the GM's going along, he's giving the players a lot of freedom, and there's nothing tense going on. The 2 hours have gone by without any sort of threat, tension, or excitement. Do something about that. Mm-hmm. As a GM, force something upon them. Force a reactive encounter upon them. We don't control, and this isn't, people say, well, this is railroading, you're forcing this to happen. Well, no, you're trying to make the experience good for all, and often in life, the unexpected occurs to us, so that's okay. So you can do it anywhere from, I like to do this with, if I have introverted players. Example I gave is your party stays in an inn, right? The party's being bland, they're saying very little, the GM's trying to get them to do stuff, they're not doing much, they're just standing on the adventure treadmill waiting for the next thing to occur. So you force them into the story. So, example, the party's in a tavern, and they say we spend the night in the tavern. You say, okay, at 2 in the morning, you wake up to the sound of crashing and splintering wood from the floor below. When you look out the tiny window, you see a bunch of armed men in the alleyway. You smell smoke coming from somewhere in the building, and you hear booted footsteps coming up the stairs. What do you want to do? I dare you to be an introvert now. I dare you to take no action, because your character's done if you do. Right? You're going to learn the lesson the hard way. But bam, you've all of a sudden, holy crap, I've got to respond to this. I've got to do something. So you can bring the players into the game that way. Now, that's a blunt way. A less blunt way would be just to throw a mystery at their feet. The party is walking through town. Somebody stumbles out of an alleyway with 3 arrows in their back. They grab the shirt of a PC and they say, "They're coming tonight," and they die. If that doesn't draw your players in, your players are dead. Okay,
that's it. I mean, in the last game session I ran, the players were holed up in a temple, and then they hear the sound. They hear a sound of someone running outside. Go up to the balcony, look over, and they see a bedraggled-looking figure being chased by a group of thuggish-looking individuals who are quite clearly intent on doing him harm. So down the street. And although it's not something that's directly sort of aimed at them, because obviously I know the characters we've got, so one of them being the sort of, oh, well, good men can't stand idle if evil's going to be dealt with. So you've got a Megan, all right, so what do we do? You've got a couple of them who are like, all right, well, we want to jump in and we're going to deal with these thugs in the way that player characters deal with them best. And then you've got another person who's going, right, well, I'm going to sort of duck out the door and try and grab this guy and pull him in to get him to safety so they don't see him. And straight away, as you quite rightly said, Rob, whatever the reactions are, you've got a reaction rather than them just sort of sitting inside a building and that lull in the game occurring.
Right, yeah. You're not helpless as a GM. So I haven't really thought about it much in this way, but I think it's also doable as a player, right? If the GM isn't going to inject some life into the session, let's take a traveling session. Party's traveling from point A to point B, and no bandits attack them along the way, no goblin ambushes await them. They're just having point A to point B. Jump in there as a player. Even if the DM is willing to speed ahead, sometimes you can say to the GM as a player, no, on the way, I want to go to this character, and I want to say this. Listen, I noticed that you picked up a piece of paper when we were back at that last adventure, or we finished off those bad guys. What was that all about? And if you really want to be sneaky about it, say that when the player didn't pick up a piece of paper. Tell him he did. And all of a sudden, now he's thinking that his wheels are turning, and you can get some great instant role play out of that. And bam, you've got the attention of the other players at the table. You've made the scene more interesting for everyone. Even the GM's like, wait, what's this all about? Well, I didn't know any of this. Right?
I mean, it's one of the things that drew me to my sort of preferred system. The fact that you have these sort of the story elements of your sort of character written down, and obviously you can have some complications proposed and sort of compelled by the GM, but you can also, as a player, say, all right, well, because I've got this aspect where I'm hunted by bandits, might this now be a sort of time where that group who we saw sort of like a couple of sessions ago, maybe they've been on our trail since then and they've just started to catch us up, and you can suggest something like that to the GM. You get a little bit of a reward in terms of like your fate point or whatever for suggesting it, but obviously the main reward is that you've suggested and you've potentially sort of brought in an interesting encounter which can be used to move the game along and get everyone involved in that, because obviously you're all going to be tracked by the bandits since you're all together, and then just sort of see where it goes from there.
Right. These are great ideas, and you can see. I don't want to sound like we're getting too much off the original topic of this video, because we're not. All these relate. You can see how if everybody is doing this, if everyone is trying to come up with ways to add to the scene, a team making this effort, not just the GM, not just the players waiting to see what comes next in the adventure, but during that period, the players are trying to make the scene better. then it brings the whole thing to life. You don't have time to do all this mental nitpicking and, oh, I don't like when the GM did that, because you're taking an active part. The players are contributing as much to the game as the GM, so you can't really be stuck in that GM mind if he's only doing 1/4 of the talking, right? And you help to ferment that, so you can help to ferment that as a player. I know some of my personal favorite joys as a GM is when I don't have to do anything for a half an hour, and the players are arguing or discussing something in character from just things I've initiated. That's incredibly rewarding, you know. Now, there's times when you don't want to do that. If the GM actively has, you know, some scene going on, don't ignore that. Don't respond to that. Let that scene be the scene you're trying to help and not something else. The stuff I'm talking about is in between to add to the overall experience. And so again, we get back to what I was saying. If the GM is going for a tense scene, have your character help that. Use words that help describe that. Have him say things to other PCs that help suggest tension. This is still you analyzing what he's doing, but you're doing it in a way to be positive and feel good about it, as opposed to picky and dissatisfied with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree that does sound like a far better way of almost, as you say, using the fact that you're analysing the game and you've got that experience as a GM, rather than sort of going, right, well, how do I come up with a way to stop myself doing that, which, as you said earlier on, I don't think it is ever truly possible to stop yourself doing that, because you've got that experience as a GM, you've sort of built up that knowledge base, so it's only natural that you'd sort of instinctively want to use it in a game. But I do think that's a very good idea, trying to use it to help the game, to assist the actual GM of your current game, rather than sort of trying to tamp down on it and sort of find some way to ignore it.
Right, and same OG, when I was talking to him about this, he brought up a point that I want to clarify. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going along with the GM's plot, and you have to let him railroad you. That's a different topic. But what it means is you want to help him make the scene as good as it can be, whatever the scene is. Your player can choose a different course of action. It doesn't mean you're confining yourself to, you know, the one hook the GM's offering, but it means you're trying to just help that scene come alive, help it be, analyze what he's trying to do and help him get it done, right, basically. And hopefully everybody else is doing that, and then it can't fail. And everybody will have a good time, because everyone is trying to help everyone else have a good time. When you're a player, there isn't really much time for sitting on the bench. And I think too often I see players sitting on the bench. Oh, I'm just going to go on cruise mode for half an hour. Well, you selfish bastard. You're saying, I'm not going to help the rest of you guys have fun. You make it fun for me. Why do you get that choice? No, you're nothing special. We all do the same thing. And, you know, and I don't want to make it sound like it's work, because if everybody does that, it will be fun for everyone. You'll have laughter. People will be absorbed. They'll be entertained. They'll be right into it, you know. It can really be such a wonderful experience if everyone is doing this constantly, right?
I very much agree. I mean, I think it's that whole thing about it being more than the sum of its parts, where if you're all sort of putting in, you get far more back than if, as you say, there's a couple of people who are just sort of sat back and just sort of cruising along and not really contributing anything to an actual game session.
Yes, Runeslinger often talks about how wonderful emergent play can be. And I think often people mistake emergent play for, oh, this new plot line and quest was invented on the spot. No, it doesn't have to be that. It's more often characters interacting with each other and triggering avenues that they hadn't previously considered. They just come out in the acting out of the character from those players' efforts to be more entertaining to the others, right? And, you know, sometimes that being entertaining can simply be acting in character, speaking like your character, you know what I mean? Making choices that the other people sitting at the table would recognize are choices that you, the person, the real person, wouldn't make. But they're choices that are, oh, that's so Farben. he always acts like that, right? That can be really rewarding to them. And, so it really comes down to, I guess, pushing and trying to make that experience immersive and fun. And that becomes what you're mentally absorbed in. You're not mentally absorbed in the deconstruction of the GM's work. And as I said, you're free to do that after the session.
No, I think that's a very good point. As you say, sort of throwing yourself into sort of working how you can, as a player, how you can help improve the setting and the session for everybody by your participation. In a way, you've sort of focused that sort of GM mindset. You've not got rid of it. You've sort of focused it in a more constructive way. And as you rightly say, when you do get to the end of a session, you've always got the fact you can then sit back and look at it when it's not going to interfere with your enjoyment of the session, and sort of say, oh, right, well, now I'm going to think about some of those things that I maybe would have done a bit differently as a GM during the session, rather than it impinging on your enjoyment whilst you're actually playing. I thought that's a very good point.
Thanks. Yeah, often when people come to sessions, sometimes I get a little put off. I see people make comments like, they'll come to a session, they've set aside 4 hours in a week to game, and they're blabbing it up with real life stuff for the first half an hour, 45 minutes of those 4 hours. And some people think, well, they're having fun, they're just being social, that's what it's all about. No. I'm going to disagree there. You've arranged for 4 hours out of 160, whatever it works out to, hours to play the game. Spend those 4 hours playing the game. If you want to have your little chat, show up early or have that chat later. And I understand, I don't mean, okay, it's on the dot, we have to start. I don't mean military about it, but try and make the most of that 4 hour window. That's all you've got. So, maximize.
When I sort of run a Google Hangout game, I always try and make myself available for the half hour preceding the game, and then you've got that to chat about generic things, do greetings and say hello to people, etc., and have a little bit of chit chat, and also obviously especially when you're doing Hangouts, to iron out any sort of problems people may have, like if their microphone's not turned on properly or their camera's not working or whatever. You've got a little bit of time to iron those problems out and discuss anything that you need to, like saying, oh, are there any issues from the previous session? Does anyone need to ask about any rules, queries, or anything before we get onto it? And you've got half an hour to deal with that without it impinging on your actual session time.
Right, yeah. And again, you wind up, making that focus fun. So I don't know if there's much more I can say that isn't repeating myself on this particular topic. Is there anything specific you want to ask, or does anybody have any questions we can go to, or we can just go on a tangent here? What's up? When anything works.
Yeah, I'm always up for the tangent. I think we've pretty much covered everything that I originally brought up in my response video to Same Old G's video. So I think you've given some very good advice there, Rob. So thanks very much for that.
So let me ask you this then: do you think this will help you to get out of that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think very much so. So I think perhaps I've made the mistake that you sort of alluded to earlier on, where I've sort of looked at the sort of GM mindset initially as a very bad thing, and thought, right, well, how can I stop myself doing that? And as you rightly say, I've not been able to stop myself doing that because I do GM an awful lot, and I have GM'd an awful lot, so it's always there. So I think actually just trying to channel it in a more constructive way, so as you said, will be very helpful to me, because I won't be trying to sort of squelch down on these sort of instincts I've got. I'll actually just be trying to sort of redirect how the output's being used effectively. So yeah, I think that'll be very helpful for me.
Bravo, A+. You just passed my course.
Thank you. Well, you'll find out anyway when I'm playing in your D&D 2 shots.
Right on. Yes.
And I'm very much looking forward to that.
Oh, good, yeah. It should be fun. My tribute to the Team of Horrors.
That's it. I'm still working out how exactly I want to sort of portray my tiefling rogue, but it should be good fun. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay, so if we've got no questions on this topic and we've got some time,
Yeah.
and then we can address a few other topics. These are a couple topics that came up recently. I saw them discussed. GM PCs, GMs playing a character in a party, and or players playing multiple characters. In my opinion, both are wrong always. So we'll deal with those one at a time.
Yeah.
First one.
I mean,
players. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You give me your.
I was just gonna say, I have to admit I'm not a fan of either myself. I have more of a personal objection to GMs playing PCs in a game than I do in multiple sort of PCs. I can sort of see that working under very specific circumstances, but generally, again, I wouldn't be in favour of that either, to be perfectly honest.
Right. Okay. So GM PCs are wrong for a few reasons. One, that PC has all the answers because the GM has all the answers. And even if the GM doesn't roleplay that PC feeding the answers to the players know that traveling with them is someone who has all the answers. It's like an unlimited clue machine. They can constantly barrage, right?
Yeah. Also,
the players and only the players are the stars of your adventure. Everybody else, every character the GM plays is a supporting character. Now, if you want to have an NPC travel with the party, that's fine, although I have limitations on how it should be done, but that's okay, but not a PC. Now, people say, what's the difference? Okay, so the difference is twofold. The NPC, if he's of equal or greater power to the PCs, should be with them only a short time. Otherwise, he becomes the star, and everybody else and the players who should be the stars become the supporting characters.
Yeah.
So it's bad. Or have the NPC be a non-combatant or very weak character. I once had a campaign where the party had a goblin that they spared become their porter, and he would just haul stuff around for them. And he never leveled up, and as the adventure campaign went on, they would get higher levels, and he was still, comparatively very weak. So he was a non-combatant, but he would travel with the party, and he didn't have any answers to offer them. You know what I mean? Unless it was like goblin writing or something. So that's okay, but not as a PC. If you're creating an actual stat sheet, hit points, and keeping back, and you're rolling to attack yourself, no, don't do that. Just don't do that.
I very much agree there. I mean, I'm always in favour of the fact that the player characters are the principal cast of a game. So I think anything that, effectively, to use like a sort of TV/movie analogy, anything that takes screen time away from the player characters doesn't actually benefit the game that much. And yeah, okay, you might have a small cutscene where it's a couple of NPCs talking to each other. If that somehow benefits the game, the overall story, and it gives players more of a sort of idea of what's going on. But I always think such things should be either kept to a minimum because you don't want to take the spotlight off the players for too long, or if it's like a longer cutscene, I'd rather have that as a little handout, give it to the players between the session, and they can read it at their own leisure, find out what's going on, and it's not, like you say, sucking away this sort of often quite precious sort of gaming time.
Exactly right, 100%, exactly right. Everybody except the PCs is a supporting character, and you have to keep that in mind. It doesn't mean that they're necessarily weaker or stronger than the PCs. Maybe the king is a supporting character, right? Because he's not a member of the party, but it doesn't. Keep that in mind. He's a supporting character. The focus is always on the players. That doesn't mean the world doesn't move without the players. But it's only really what happens to the players that is the focus of the story.
Yeah, I mean, there's no point putting the spotlight on. Obviously, you can have, as your sort of GM, that there's other events going on further afield that may eventually sort of become relevant, or you may see the result of, like, say, in a sort of generic fantasy game, say that there's an evil despot rolling over a foreign kingdom somewhere with his armies. You can know that's going on in the background, but unless it's actually affecting what's going on in the foreground of the game, you don't really need to make a big deal out of it. And yes, later on they might come across evidence that that's happened. Like maybe they hear someone saying that the trade ships from that kingdom haven't been arriving on time or haven't been coming through at all. But it's not something you want to shift the spotlight to entirely, because it should be what affects the player characters and how they move through the world and what sort of goes on around them that you mainly keep the spotlight on.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's all 100%. So the other part is players playing multiple characters. This is bizarre. I can see how it could kind of work in a fun, not too serious sort of game, but we're playing a role-playing game. You're playing a role, and just saying, "I'm a fighter with an axe," that's not a role. Okay, that's a character class you've selected. A role is playing a character, a person. So, and remember, one of the key differences between a PC and an NPC, and this kind of relates to why GM shouldn't have PCs, is that a PC should be much, much, much more fleshed out than an NPC. When I create an NPC, one sentence of physical description, 2 lines of personality description. That's it. You know, I might have a couple of notes on a background if they have a quest and that knowledge is relevant to the quest or whatever. Or maybe I'll have a secret. This person secretly hates that one. This one is secretly in love with that one. This one had a love child with that. Whatever. And that can help give them some life. I'm not saying have one-dimensional NPCs, but compared to a PC that's played out over a campaign, that PC becomes much more detailed out with subtleties and not just background, but inflections, ways of acting, ways of responding, to the point where it gets recognizable. That person's style, that character style rather, gets recognizable by other PCs.
Well, I think it's like in a TV series, if the main cast, the main sort of protagonist, i.e. the players in our sort of game, would be, they're the ones who are most thoroughly detailed, because you stay with them throughout the series, you see their actions, you see what becomes of them, so they need to be the most detailed. Where some sort of, I don't know, some like newspaper boy who turns up once, you only see him very briefly, so all you really need to know about him is, like you said, like how he talks, how he interacts with the player characters briefly, that he delivers newspapers, what his physical appearance is like. And then, yeah, maybe you get a few that you detail more, you know, like recurring sort of characters, recurring NPCs that appear. But you've always got the option to, let's say you want the paperboy to become a recurring NPC, you've always got the option of building on that and expanding that. But there's no point drastically detailing out every NPC down to the nth degree, when if you never see that paperboy again, well, that sort of 2-chapter life story you've written for him, that was time you could have spent doing something else in your game.
Yes. Never waste your creative time. Spend your creative time where it's most needed. And you're quite right. That paperboy is going to see in the course of a 4-hour session, 5-10 minutes screen time? Yeah. It doesn't need a huge background. The character, which is going to see a lot, the PC, which is going to see a lot of screen time, that's the one that needs to be detailed in. So, why can't one person play more than one of these at the same time? Imagine you're watching a TV show. It could be Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones. Imagine the same actor playing both parts in a scene, jumping back and forth, having a conversation with himself. First of all, that's silly. Second of all, it's not that entertaining for other players to sit there and watch you converse with yourself. This is why, as a GM, I try hard to avoid 2 NPCs talking for long. It's not that entertaining. It's not interactive at all, right? It's an interactive role-playing game. It's not just a monologue role-playing game.
Absolutely. The only way, one of the circumstances I can see sort of like having 2 PCs working under is if you've got one as a sort of backup PC, like if you're playing a sort of high-threat, sort of high-fatality game, but even then you're not playing those 2 on the screen at the same time. You've just sort of got one waiting in the wings to be brought in so you can jump back into the game if your first player character meets an unfortunate end.
Yeah, I can see that working. Maybe you have a retainer So you get 20% of the screen time, and your retainer gets 2%. That's fine. You're still principally playing one character.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, in one of the Dungeon World games I'm running at the minute, we're sort of doing the last session at the end of this week. So it's just like a mini sort of 10-session sort of mini campaign, and the character that my wife's playing died in the ninth session. Now, obviously, because there's only one more session remaining in the game, there's no point trying to bring in a whole new PC that we've somehow got to tie into the plot and that's never been encountered before. But because there's a fairly sort of large stable of NPCs in the game, some of which have been detailed more, some of which have been detailed less, she's actually going to take on the role of basically a ship captain that they sort of met and who has travelled with them for a certain amount of the campaign, and whose ship her original character was on when she died, and he's going to sort of try and carry the message back that she was carrying back to the rest of the player characters. And that's easy to do because we've got a bit of detail on him, but we can then just upgrade him to a character. So
sure, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, she sort of had two characters in the game, but up until very recently, until he got sort of upgraded, that was a standard NPC, rather than her trying to sort of play two characters at once.
Right, and this again it answers what we were saying about how one person, you're still playing one primary character, right? You're not playing. Right. It also I was thinking also too about how this relates to GM PCs. As the GM, you get to play every supporting character. 10, 20 of them. How damn greedy are you that that's not enough screen time for you, that you need another PC? Oh no, the player defends. I'm doing the players a favor. They need a healer. No, they don't. They don't need a healer. They don't need a rogue. They don't need anything. They need a group of people. And if you've written your adventure so that, well, without a rogue, they'll never get past here, then you wrote a shitty adventure. Fix that. Don't make it so bottleneck dependent. What if the rogue dies? What's your whole adventure is going to collapse because that one rogue died? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
don't
I very much have the same thought about adventures that are written with sort of like that hinge on a specific character within the player party. Where they say, oh well, just for a random sort of stereotyped example, there's a prophecy about the barbarian of the party, and he's going to go on and do. He's been killed in the second combat encounter of the game. Oh right, so unless I do some major backpedaling or I sort of swiftly rearrange the majority of that plot isn't going to happen. Whereas if I'd have, as you rightly say, if I'd have thought about it a bit more and sort of tried to make that plot a bit broader so that it pulled in interest from more of the other PCs as well, not only will they be able to carry on with it, but they've probably been more involved from the beginning rather than just sort of going, oh well, this is the barbarians thing really, and we're just sort of tagging along. You've almost sort of relegated the rest of the PCs to a support role, and as we were saying earlier, that's the NPC's job, not the player character's job.
Right, absolutely right. And it's okay to have a storyline end. Oh, well, the player died. That's where his storyline ends. If that brings your whole game to a halt, well, you put all your eggs in one basket. Like, what are you doing? The world doesn't work that way. Lots and lots of things are going on simultaneously. Imagine in the Star Wars trilogy, not the three ones that are forgettable, but the Star Wars trilogy. Imagine Luke Skywalker if he had died, late in the first movie. Well, he never would have been around to help redeem Darth Vader, and the Empire would have taken over. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Oh well, that story didn't turn out the way I planned because that character died. Right? It's okay for a movie where everything is static. There's no interaction. There's no chance for variance. You can't treat all aspects of a role-playing game like a movie, right?
No, I mean, I think
sometimes. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that I think you're right when it comes to that. I mean, obviously, movies and television series are very good sort of analogies when we're talking about certain aspects of RPGs. But I think it's a mistake a lot of GMs make. I certainly know I made the mistake when I was younger, when I first started GMing, that you do tend to sort of think of it as a movie where, as you rightly say, everything is set out. You know that certain things are going to happen because that's the way you've written it. Whereas I know when I did a lot of my first adventures, I was like, oh well, the player characters will probably do this, and then that'll lead on to this, and that'll lead on to this, and then you get to the first sort of hurdle, and the player characters inevitably do not do what you expected, and you're like, oh shit, well how do I salvage this adventure now? So I think it's a lesson that sort of I learned fairly early that you can't plan everything down to the nth degree, because you can know your players well, you can know their characters well, and you can have a good idea of what they might likely do, but you can never 100% guarantee it, so you can't plan for every eventuality.
Yes, absolutely right. And how dull would it be if they did every single thing you expected every time, and nothing was unexpected as a GM?
Yeah.
That would be boring as hell.
I mean,
right?
I love it in games where the player characters do something that sort of, not so much that it keeps me on my toes, but where something unexpected happens. Because as you say, if everything was scripted to that degree, where I knew everything that was going to happen, nothing went off track, and it was all straight along the plot line, I'd know everything that was going to happen. There'd be no sort of creativity during the session for me. All my creative work would have been done beforehand, and I'd just be sort of rotely sending it out to the players. I'd just be sort of reciting what I'd already done sort of earlier, rather than actually having to be creative during a session. And I don't think it'd be anywhere near as enjoyable for me.
Yeah, you might as well just send your players a script.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah, very much so.
To any new or still learning GMs out there, well, we're always learning, but any upcoming GMs, don't feel bad if you've made these mistakes. I've made all these mistakes when I was younger. I've done the Monty Hall campaign. I've done this obscure solution to a puzzle and that you must solve mistakes. You know, I've done all those mistakes. I've done the GMPC mistakes. I've done the mistakes of having too powerful an NPC along with the party. You know, I made them all. So don't feel bad if you make those mistakes. But don't get stagnant. Look at yours. Always try to get better. Look at ways you can improve. That GM mind we're talking about, and analysis you do after the session. Feel free to do that with your own games. Ask for feedback. When you say to your players, what did you think? And they just say, oh, I had fun. That's not good enough. What did you like specifically? What didn't you like? What would you like to see more of? What would you like to see less of? And look at why they might like or dislike that. And, you know, those are ways you can seek to improve your game as well. So don't feel guilty if you've made these mistakes.
I think as well that, like you say, I've made pretty much all of these mistakes as well, Rob, and I do think that a friend of mine said to me recently, because I was talking about my YouTube channel, and he said because he's not done quite as much GMing as me, but he said, it could be quite daunting as a player if you've just started playing and you maybe think, oh well, I'd quite like to try GMing, and then you look online and you might think, oh, you've got to watch hundreds of thousands of sort of hours of video before you dare pick up the books and try and run a game. So and I was thinking, well, yeah, obviously I don't agree with that, and I can see you shaking your head there, but I could see how maybe people could get that impression, and it led to me recording the sort of intro video for my YouTube channel, where I basically say in it, obviously all the videos I do, they're designed to try and sort of put ideas out there, and people can sort of take from them what they want and take what they find useful. But the most important thing is to get out there, give it a go. You won't be perfect. You'll make mistakes. Of course you will. But I never think it's a crime for anyone to not instantly be the world's best games master. I mean, I'm still making mistakes now. I'm still trying to learn from them. I think the only sort of crime is when you think you are the world's best GM and you've got nothing further to learn, because you can always learn something else. You can always sort of improve your game, even if it's only by a tiny little bit. There's always something else out there, or a new idea that someone else has had that you've maybe not thought of, but you think, oh yeah, I could take that and I could bring a bit of that into my game. And I think that's why I love these topics where people are talking to each other, like in the YouTube RPG Brigade, etc., and on YouTube, that even though the same sort of topics get rolled round again and again, there's always the chance that someone who maybe is encountering it for the first time won't know all the sort of backstory, and they won't have seen all the previous conversations, or that maybe someone will come in with something a little bit new, and you'll go, oh well, yeah, I hadn't really thought about it like that, and you can sort of take from that. And that's why I was quite grateful when you said you agreed to this video to say, oh well, I've got some suggestions about the GM mind, because the idea of trying to focus that into something more positive hadn't actually occurred to me, to be perfectly honest, up until you mentioned it. So
I'm glad I could help. And I wasn't shaking my head because I disagreed with you. I was shaking my head because I disagreed with the person who thinks they need to watch thousands of videos to do this.
Yeah.
You're going to learn by doing, right? And then what I suggest is, and I'll say that it's easier to learn the lessons more quickly now because all this information is out there.
Yeah.
When I was doing it back in the late 70s, I was fumbling. I was making the same mistakes for a long time, right? It took me a while. I was slow to learn this stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, when I was sort of doing most of my early jamming, sort of in the sort of late 80s, the amount of mistakes I made, and obviously not having access to like the internet or anything like that, sort of back then, and certainly not sort of like fast streaming high definition videos and stuff like that. I had to make the mistakes an awful lot of times before I worked out what I could do differently. Whereas now you can look at something and I mean I ran loads of games where I knew as I was doing it I was making the same mistake I'd done previously, but I couldn't see what I could do to change it. So you try something, run a game, oh that solution didn't work. I'll try something else, that solution didn't work. Whereas now you've got this sort of large resource where when you think, oh well that didn't really work, you can look at other people who've already sort of done that, and rather than sort of saying, oh well you've made a mistake that makes you a bad GM, they're sort of saying, well don't worry about it, don't beat yourself up about it, I've made that mistake as well, here's how I went about trying to improve it. And then you've got someone else saying, well I did something slightly different, and you can look at all of those and you can sort of use them to form your own solution more quickly, rather than having to sort of go through the sometimes slightly laborious sort of trial and error process.
Yeah, you made the next point I was going to make. You take this player who's played for a while and wants to try GM, and he feels daunted by it, and he's like, oh my God, there's all this research to do. No. Just get comfortable with the system and, be a player first. Don't try and start as a GM. I know people have done it. It's always easier to start as a player. So you start as a player. When you're ready to get your GMing feet wet, get something prepared. Make sure you give yourself a lot of time. State your intention weeks in advance to the players, and then you run your session. And then whatever mistakes you feel you made afterwards, maybe make a note of those and seek out videos on how to correct those mistakes. And then do another session, and maybe you'll repeat those mistakes or make new mistakes. And you do the same thing. And eventually you're making fewer and fewer mistakes, right? And, I play bridge at a competitive level, and the experts will tell you that the top players in the world don't make no mistakes. They just make fewer mistakes. And that's all you can ever hope to do, right, as a GM. It's not something you can ever perfect. It's just something you can get better at.
I entirely agree. I mean, I certainly... one of the things I like about, one of the reasons I record a lot of my sort of sessions on the sort of like the Hangouts like we're doing now, is that it's very useful for me if I get the time, and I don't always, but if I do get the time to be able to listen to those sessions back through, as well as sort of me being able to like update my campaign notes rather than sort of frantically scribbling away whilst I'm running the actual session. It makes it easier for me to look back and go, well, I think I possibly made a bit of an error back in the session. I can flick back, have a look at it, and then sort of start working out what I want to do about it once I've worked out what the actual problem is, rather than sort of you've got half a memory of like something you maybe did in the first 10 or 15 minutes, and then you've had like another 3 hours of gaming. Your memory of that sort of event is not going to be perfect. And to be honest, a lot of the time it's not actually as bad as you thought it was. I know a lot of GMs sort of beat themselves up over their mistakes, and I've done it myself, where you think, oh God, I didn't make such a ridiculous mistake. I shouldn't have had that NPC monologuing at them for 30 minutes or whatever. But I think the tendency is as a sort of GM to only focus on the sort of things you've done wrong, if you will, and sort of only try and solicit feedback about that. Whereas I also think you need to, if you do that, you tend to get very downhearted, and you're like, oh, like I'm only seeing the mistakes I made in that session. Whereas you also need to, on your sort of feedback, as you said earlier, what did the players like? What did you do well?
Yes, quite right. Just give me 5 seconds. My wife's vacuuming. I want to shut the door.
No problems.
Yeah, yeah, you don't want to beat yourself up too badly. But when you're listening to your old sessions, first of all, you're absolutely right. It's a great resource to have your sessions recorded and be able to look back, and that is the really good time to bring out the GM mind when you're analyzing your own self, not during a session, but between sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can turn that on to the maximum and analyze it there. I used to wonder a lot, how well am I doing this? How well am I doing this? Because so often when I ask my players for feedback, oh, it was good. It was fine. I had fun. Ugh, I want to smack you. Help me to help you. Give me some feedback. What did you like? When I gamed with Ander, he was always very, very helpful after the sessions. He would literally go through the session from start to finish. I like this NPC. You know what I mean? That was really, really helpful. I hope I can get this message out to players. Giving useful, specific feedback like that is incredibly helpful to a GM. And remember that we GMs, our fuel is our players' enthusiasm. Be proactive between the sessions. Talk to you. Be excited about your character. Be excited about the campaign. Talk to your GM between sessions. That is fuel and feeds and motivates your GM to want to bring you a wonderful session. Never underestimate that.
I think as well with the sort of preponderance of sort of social media and emails and various other sort of methods of contacting people now, that there's very little excuse for, if you have a query or you've got a question about a session, so leaving it to the start of the session. And again, that sort of comes around to that whole, the time you allocate for roleplay is precious time. You want to use as much of it to roleplay as you possibly can. So I mean, I always try and encourage the players in my game, if you've got any queries or questions that you haven't been able to think of in the sort of little wrap up we do after the game or the sort of half hour before it, just drop me a message on Facebook, send me an email, whatever, and I'll try and get back to you as quickly as I can, since it's in my best interest as well as yours to make sure you have the answers there and to deal with these queries. And as you rightly say, it lets you know that the players are enthused about your game, and the more you think they're enjoying it and the more they want to play it, the more effort you want to put into preparing it to getting a good game to them.
Yes, and this kind of brings us back full circle. It's a symbiotic relationship where everybody at the table is doing their best to make it as fun a session for everyone else, and it just, everybody benefits from that, right? Runeslinger originally said, strive to be entertaining instead of seeking to be entertained. And by striving to be entertaining, you will be entertained as long as all your other players do likewise. So that's really, really good advice. Yeah, I remember I came to a conclusion once. I was like, well, I've been doing this for 15 years, and they come back week after week after week. I got to be doing something right. Yep. So surely it's not just showing up out of boredom or pity.
I mean, I'm the same as I said earlier on. I've done the sort of whole sort of beating yourself up as a GM and thinking, oh, you can only see the sort of like, you always overanalyze stuff, and you only see the sort of like the bad side of the game sessions you've run. They're never sort of quite good enough for you. I mean, I think what stopped me originally doing that was at the point where I sort of thought, well, to be honest, if my sessions were as bad as at one point in time I thought they were, because I was just focusing on the negative, then the players wouldn't still be playing them. They wouldn't turn up week after week and go. And I'm not saying that, even now, I'm certainly not saying that my sessions are perfect, but that they must be enjoyable to a certain level. Otherwise, when you go, oh, I'm running a game, who fancies playing it, people will be like, no, you're all right, don't worry about it. People wouldn't want to invest their time into it. And obviously time, as we said, free time, especially as you get older and you've got more responsibilities and more real life stuff, your free time is precious. So for someone to say to me, I'm willing to invest 4 hours of my time in something that you've effectively created out of thin air, out of imagination, both your own and the other players and mine, it's a good sort of ringing endorsement to me. That's how I see it.
Yes, you're quite right. And there's no such thing as the perfect session. It's never occurred.
No.
But yeah, you can always strive to make it better, and I'll tell you from one GM to another, you are an excellent GM. So have no worries. You do a very good job.
Well, no, like I said, I've certainly got over the very self-critical stage that I sort of went through, and I think a lot of GMs do go through it, as we were saying earlier.
Oh yeah.
Where it's very easy when you're trying to analyze your own stuff to be overly critical, and to sort of hold yourself to an impossibly high standard. And I think if you have some sort of imagined mythical, which, let's face it, as we've both said, doesn't exist, a perfect GM or perfect session, if you're sort of holding your own session against that standard, and that's where you're saying you think it should be, you're obviously going to fall a little bit below that because, as you say, the perfect session doesn't exist. But what you have to do is you have to, as well as looking at things you've maybe done wrong or that you could have done better, let's say, you have to also look at, as well as your defeats, you have to look at your triumphs as well, and the fact that your players are still willing to invest their precious free time in your game.
Yes. So do the bad things less and do the good things more.
I think that's all anyone can hope to do when they're GMing, or even, as we've said, when you're playing.
I guess I'm just about said everything I intended to say. If there's anything more I can add, you let me know. Any questions?
I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up, Rob. I think we've covered even slightly more than we originally planned to. So thank you very much for agreeing to come on air and talk with me about this.
Anytime, any topic, buddy. You let me know.
Will do, and as we were saying earlier, I certainly do enjoy the sort of conversational videos where you've got other people to bounce things off, and it does come down to this whole idea of, like we were saying about role playing, it's very much a sort of a collaborative experience. If you've got more people throwing ideas into that sort of melting pot, the results you get out are more than the sum of their parts at the end, rather than just your own sort of views coming back to you. So thank you very much for talking to me, Rob, and I will put a link to theSwamper's YouTube site down below. Obviously, you can subscribe to mine by clicking on the red dice, and we hope that this video is this slightly rambling, slightly sort of tangential video, which we've enjoyed producing for you, has been very useful. And as we've said, you don't have to watch thousands of hours of video footage to GM, to game. Just get out there, play the games. When you want to GM, pick up that book, run a few sessions. And when you inevitably do make mistakes, as we all do, don't feel too bad about it. These videos are out there as a support for the stuff that you do. Take what you want from them and leave the rest to one side. Use what helps you, and I'm sure you will find that your games, as you go on, will improve. And as Rob rightly said earlier, you'll do the bad things less and you'll do the good things more. So thank you very much for watching, and we will see you later. Take care.